Well, it's 11 o'clock. We're on the top of the hour. So my name's Bob Hayward, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Helen of Morgen HR. We are talking about an incredibly important topic for any organization, because any recruitment mistake becomes a management problem. There is a vast number of people available for most jobs at the moment, sadly, from a COVID point of view. But from a business point of view, it gives us a massive opportunity if we can find the right people. And who better than Helen to talk us through this with her 25 plus years experience at advising HR directors across the world. Helen, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. So good morning and welcome to this week's webinar. And as Bob said, we're going to be talking about effective recruitment in your business. So can I just ask everybody to put into the chat the percentage of a person's salary that you think reflects the cost of that recruitment? And Bob, if you could just give me an idea what's going in there, that would be great.
I'll read them out for you. 50%, 50%, 10%, 30%, 50%, 30%, 15 to 30%. Nice range. Thank you, Hassan. Yeah. 20%, says Gordon.
Okay, no, so some interesting numbers there. And most people, when they're talking about recruitment costs, are looking at the external expenditure of hiring. And in businesses who are reliant on recruitment agencies, this is typically somewhere between 15 and 30% of the salary. But the bigger cost to the business is in getting the recruitment wrong. So hopefully we can make sure that this doesn't happen to you. It's not just the time wasted or recruitment fees that comprise the true cost of a bad hire. I find it interesting that many employers don't consider that a bad hire has actually cost them anything. There are things like training costs, loss of productivity to consider. There are potential termination costs, as well as non-quantifiable detrimental effects on your team morale, brand reputation, or the turnover of other staff. In 2019, PwC estimated that the total cost of a bad hire could be anything from 50 to 150% of the annual salary in question. Whereas the REC, that's the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, estimate the cost of a poor middle manager hire could be as much as 3 times the salary. I think the important thing to take away from this is that the major liability of the future success of your business when you are talking those sorts of numbers. We're going to be looking at the tools and processes available to businesses to support them in making the best decisions on their recruitment journey. I'm going to be talking about what you do as a business, and it will apply whether you're managing the recruitment process internally or whether you use an external recruiter or executive search agency or a combination of both. Again, if I can ask you to put in the chat, what's the first thing you do in your recruitment process?
Interesting question. Do remember to change your chat to send a message to all panelists and attendees. Well done, Scott. Write the job description. Write the job description. That would certainly be, Roger, the job description would be, I would do. Morning, John. Ensure the correct job description is in place. See if there's someone internal. Interesting angle, Walter. Yeah. Set up the job description, do a person profile. Benchmark, says Ken. Gain an understanding of exactly what the hiring manager is looking for, or the client in Alex's case. Write the job description, says Carol.
Okay, so some interesting thoughts there, and I think they're all really valid. For me, the first step in the internal process of what happens in your business is about what happens in your head. And perhaps even before that, looking at the exit interview, if there was a previous incumbent in the role. You have to start somewhere. And for me, there's always a couple of questions that I want to ask. And the first one of these is, do I really need to fill this vacancy? You know, things are changing very quickly at the moment with remote working and flexible working, and it could well be that the job that you need doing could be done differently. The role could be split down and shared out. As I said, it could become a flexible or a remote role, and you certainly need to think about whether it needs to be done full time. So this is really about investigating the needs of the business to help you determine the requirements of the role. Once you've decided that you do need to recruit, whether that's going to be internally or using an agency, you'll need to consider the talent pool most relevant for your vacancy. So do you require local talent, or do you want to fish in a bigger talent pool? Portals such as Web Recruit can help you to manage that whole process, and they do post to all of the job boards. Other avenues may be your company website, local papers, or your business may operate a recruiter friend scheme whereby you inform all your current employees and ask them to bring like-minded people to your attention. So now that we're happy that we really do need to hire somebody for the business, we can get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about some of the tools that you'd be advised to have in place to help you with recruitment. Some of you mentioned the job description, and this is the list of tasks that need to be completed in order to fulfill the purpose of the job. Think about prioritising tasks that will be taking at least 5% of the person's time, and then work out which of those tasks are the 5 most important. This will help you focus right down on the most important things that somebody is going to have to do. And the 5 most important tasks will contribute to the KPIs that you can use to measure success moving forward. It sounds obvious, but I've seen managers struggle to define what the person they're trying to recruit should be doing. And if you as the manager don't know what the new hire is supposed to be doing, then why are you recruiting? Think about the tasks that will need doing daily, weekly, or even monthly, and group these together. But please, please, please don't make it an endless list. That just puts people off. The person specification is another document that details the criteria that will be used to select the successful candidate. This will look at things like qualifications and past experience that the candidate will need to be able to demonstrate in order to be successful within your business. But do think about adding some of the softer elements as well, such as attitudes and behaviours, for a broader picture of how people are going to interact and behave in the role. A word of warning here. This is where businesses or employers can start to make mistakes that could be costly in the long term. Make sure that any criteria you stipulate is really critical to the successful completion of the role. So do ask yourself, does somebody really need to have a degree or 8 to 10 years of experience in order to be able to do the job? These are the sorts of criteria that can be viewed as discriminatory. So be careful and think carefully about what you need as opposed to what you might want. More and more businesses are moving towards using role profiles for recruitment. Now, role profile is slightly different to a job description person spec in that it focuses on the outcomes required from a candidate in order for them to be successful. It would specify the main responsibilities of the role, the reporting lines, the number of direct reports that person will have responsibility for. It can also include the limits of their responsibility in terms of budgetary spend and to what level they are able to discipline their teams, whether this is just verbal warnings or whether they actually have responsibility up to and including dismissal. From the point of view of the probationary review and ongoing annual performance reviews, this can be a great option as it does clearly state the KPIs from the very outset of the process. And it should also, again, include the softer elements of attitudes and behaviours. If you're not involving an agency in shortlisting for you, then I do strongly recommend that only one person does the shortlisting. This makes sure that there is a consistency in the process. We all come equipped with a set of values, and those will influence us and our choices. If more than one person is involved, then you will get a different emphasis on what they feel is important. When I get involved with this process for clients, the first step is we discuss and identify the two most important criteria for the role, and then we do our first sift of CVs or applications on those two criteria alone, and that gets us potentially from hundreds of CVs or applications down to a much more manageable number. I then use a selection grid to score candidates, and this may sound very old-fashioned, but it works. It allows a very objective selection process and is useful if your selection for interview is ever queried either by the candidate, another manager, or a third party. Note that there are no names on the grid, and this is very deliberate. Prior to shortlisting, I remove all the personal details from CVs so that the selection is done purely on skills, experience, qualifications that have been included in either the CV or the application. The removal of bias is really important, as it will help you to avoid claims for a whole raft of discrimination, and that is sex, age, religion and belief, disability or sexual orientation. About 20 years ago, I was made aware of a scam in recruitment where CVs were being submitted to very large organisations for positions. And the content of the CVs was identical in a lot of ways, and only the personal details had been changed for those that were involved in the scam. So when the white male was invited for the interview, but not the black female or the person with a disability, then a claim was being put into an employment tribunal. The use of an anonymous grid such as this can guard against just such scams. So what next? Interview? No. The interview, in my humble opinion, is the least helpful and productive part of the recruitment process. So what else do you think we can do? Can I ask you to just pop into the chat bar any ideas that you've got on where you would go next?
If you couldn't do an interview, what would you do next? That's got everybody thinking.
Is it?
Questionnaire? Question mark. Competency testing? Question mark. I'd use a disc profile with personas.
Okay.
Pros and cons of each listed in the unnamed compared against a job description. So interesting, go back and compare it against a job description. Conduct an online search about the candidates. Oh, bit of social media.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, bit of probing into the old LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah, a bit of social media stalking going on there. Okay, let's have a look. So the reason I don't jump straight into an interview, a few years ago, Mike Smith and his colleagues at the University of Manchester conducted a study on the accuracy of different recruitment methods, and the conclusions did prove very interesting. The study stated that if a method was able to predict the selection process, it had a value of 1. If the selection method had no value at all, then it had a value of 0. And it can be seen immediately, if you look at the slide, that the traditional approach of using unstructured interviews followed by taking up references comes out very badly. It's actually not that much better than using astrology to appoint people to your business. You've only got about a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. Whereas if we start using things like testing of candidates in one form or another, this can achieve much better results. And why would you not want to give yourself the best chance of a successful hire? I'm going to just take you through now some of the ways that you can use to improve your success rate in hiring. So some of the external tools you might want to avail yourself of could be the profiling tools that are available. And there are a number of these that you can use in business to enhance your chances of a successful recruitment. And choosing the right one for your business will boost your success. It might also be useful to profile the existing team as well, so that you can see how the candidates are going to fit into what you already have. Now, empathy styles is one of the models that can be used, and this one identifies the 7 empathy styles that are the strongest. The combination of styles is one of the major factors in determining our temperament and behaviours. Why not find out the empathy style of your team, and then you can identify the gaps and the good fits within the candidate pool. As people, we give ourselves away almost all of the time in the way that we dress, what we speak about and how we do that, and how we behave. To the skilled observer, these are all clues to our temperament. And so with knowledge of the empathy approach, a person can almost immediately see and hear some of the stronger temperament styles of another person, and then decide how best to communicate more effectively with them. So empathy styles can answer a couple of fundamental questions for us that we have, which is, why do people do what they do, and how can I influence them to do something differently? I just very quickly want to show you or talk you through the 7 empathy styles. So normal, this is the person that wants to fit in with other people. So they will check the dress code before going to a party. They will be mature, responsible, controlled, and appear unemotional. The hustler. This is the person who has the drive for material success. They enjoy money and the things that money will buy. They are quick, opportunistic, shrewd, entrepreneurial, and charming. This person has a nose for a deal, and they'll very quickly work out whether you can help them to get the deal or not. Next, we have the mover. And this means that they are strong communicators and have a drive to communicate. They will talk to you about anything, people, fun things, events, what you did at the weekend, anything to do with life. You'll easily recognise a strong M by their smile, which is easy, warm and frequent. They're the ones to get to organise the party. And in business, they will pick up the phone to people they don't know. Next, we have the double checker. These people are characterised by their wanting to take care of everybody. They will be the person that will make sure you're okay. Have you got the right refreshments? Are you warm enough? Their drive is for security and to make sure that everyone is safe. The artist has a strong drive to be creative and to be different. They are sensitive and are happy in their own company. Their ideas will come aplenty, and they have ideas about everything and anything. Next, we have the politician, which is characterised by the strong handshake and direct eye contact. This person has strength and determination that some of the other styles may find difficult to deal with. And finally, we have the engineer. They are all about process and detail, and their method is characterised by this. This person makes lists of lists. The great thing about an engineer is that they can form a plan as soon as look at something, and what's more, they will make it happen. Another external tool you might want to think about is the DISC profile, and I know somebody popped that in the chat earlier. And this was developed by William Marston and centres on 4 different personality traits that are currently dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. DISC profiles describe human behaviour in various situations. For example, the DISC questionnaire asks about how you respond to challenges, how you influence others, how you respond to rules and procedures, and about your preferred pace of activity. It does not measure every dimension of your personality. DISC tools allow the mapping of a role as well. And then when candidates complete the profile, they can be matched to the role. This mapping process identifies where you might want to question the candidate about their fit for the role. The person characterised as a D will be direct, firm, strong-willed, forceful and results-orientated. The I is outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, high-spirited and lively. The S is even-tempered, accommodating, patient, humble and tactful, whilst the C is analytical, reserved, precise, private and systematic. Another tool you might want to consider is the GIA. This is the General Intelligence Assessment, and it was first introduced as a way of looking at and determining the intellectual abilities and trainability of the British Armed Forces. It consists of 5 online tests that rely on processes such as thought, language, decision-making, learning and memory. Aptitude and ability tests help employers predict how quickly an individual will adapt to a new role. The GIA is composed of online tests that measure an individual's cognitive function in 5 areas. And those are reasoning, perceptual speed, number speed and accuracy, word meaning, and spatial visualization. Their score is determined by the speed and accuracy of their responses, and then compared to a norm group to determine whether the scores are higher, lower, or in line with the majority of the population. The GIA report gives you an estimate of an individual's general intelligence and gives insights into their response to training, mental processing speed, concentration, and their fast track potential. As a result, GIA can help you answer questions about the workforce, including things like, can your people think on their feet? Can they cope with the mental demands of the job? Are they good problem solvers? And how quickly can they learn? There are a number of options for practical tests that can be used to simulate as closely as possible a real life situation. One of my clients, an IT repair business, sets up a number of computers with faults. The candidates then have to fault find based on the type of information they might receive from a customer. They just need to thank themselves lucky it's not a computer I've had anything to deal with. There's obviously a time limit set on the test, and the purpose is to confirm that the candidates can think in a logical manner. When recruiting for HR positions or for solicitors, I regularly use case studies as a method of assessment because it helps to establish their thought processes and methodology. And depending on the case study, I may ask them to write down questions that they would have asked had they had that opportunity. You can also think about using things like verbal reasoning tests and in-tray exercises to help you to determine who might be the best fit for your role. Also think about having the candidates come along for a visit. Gives them some exposure to the genuine work environment. When I say come along for a day visit, it might be half a day, it might be a couple of hours. But the purpose of this is to see how the candidates interact with your existing team. How do they react to the environment and the way that you do things in practice? It's very real. I once had a client explain their recruitment process to me where they hired some very nice plush offices to interview candidates. And the first time that people ever saw the real workplace was on day 1. He seemed quite surprised that some candidates never turned up to work on day 2. Feedback from your team is also really important, as candidates will let their hair down a bit if the interviewer or the person in charge is not around. And this is one of my favourite tools. I like this because a few years ago, I was recruiting for senior counsel for an international business. And as interviewers, we had our strong contenders. As it turned out, one of these was behaving in a very pompous and condescending way towards the junior members of my team at the time, ordering them about, demanding tea and coffee. And I overheard them talking about this, so asked for more detailed feedback. To cut a long story short, I think we dodged a bullet with that one. Let me just say that if you're asking somebody to come in and experience your workplace, please do think about at least covering their expenses. So just to move on then. So as I said earlier, in my book, the interview is the least helpful part of the recruitment process. The interview should be a discussion, not an interrogation. Have 2 people involved in the interview to gain another perspective. It gives balance. You already know a great deal about this person from their CV, from the application, potentially from a role profile that you've done, or from any profiling tools you've used and any testing that you've used. You've probably got a fairly good idea how they'll behave and react. So the interview is about getting to know them better as a person. Do you like them? You could be working closely with this person for a number of years, and it'll be difficult if you don't get along. Use open questions. So these are questions that cannot be responded to with a yes or a no answer. They get people talking. Start with questions that are non-work related to relax the candidate. How was your journey here today? Tell me about your weekend. Once the candidate is relaxed and talking freely, then move on to the more work-related questions. If you want to get the best out of someone in an interview, don't have the mindset that you're trying to trip them up or catch them out, but rather that this is an opportunity for them to confirm what you already know and share anything else important. Be consistent with technical questions and score your answers. If I asked you, what does great teamwork look like to you? How would you respond? Can I get you to pop your answers in the chat, please? And then, Bob, if you can read things out for me.
Sure. Just repeat the question.
The question is, what does great teamwork look like to you?
Collaboration, says Scott.
Okay, yeah.
Communication, says Hassan. There's no I in team, says Stephen. A group of people pulling together. Group of people pulling together for a mutual goal, says Alex. All rowing in the same direction, said John. Flow, says Andy.
Right.
Things happen smoothly. Carol says when everyone gets on and things get done.
Yeah.
Ray Hand says communication and compassion. Interesting, Ray. Thank you.
Lovely, like that one.
Hassan says you can't quite tell who's the leader. Please remember to change your chat to panelists and all attendees, because some of you got some great contributions, but unless I read it out, they can't see it.
Okay.
It's just a little button above the two. Members out to support one another, says
That's
Gordon.
a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I would be listening for all of those, but I would be listening specifically for things like they're open to ideas and suggestions from others. They're sensitive to the impact their words and actions may have on others. They openly share information. Somebody did say that, didn't they? Collaboration.
Yeah.
They treat other people with respect. They're willing to compromise. And I would have those key points on a crib sheet and be ticking them as the candidate gives those answers, because that way you've got a consistent approach, as we said earlier. So, as we said, you know, this is a conversation, but you will have a set of questions for every candidate, and you do need to score the answers. Follow the ABCs, and as I said, always be consistent with your questions. This will help you make a decision later, as you can compare the answers of each candidate. Having another person involved in the interview will help with this, as they'll pick up on things that you may have missed and vice versa. It makes for a really interesting discussion prior to making the final decision. Do not ask, are you married? Do you have children? Do you plan to have children? What are your childcare arrangements? You will be skating on very, very thin ice with these. If you've built a relationship with the candidate earlier in the interview, you may already have the answers to these questions without even having to have asked. So let's do a little bit of a rewind, and I'm going to get Bob here to do a little bit of a role play with me now. So Bob, if you could just pretend that you are a candidate coming in for an interview. You've just come in, we've done all the profiling, we've done visits and things like that, but this is the first face-to-face interview.
Okay.
Oh, hi Bob, how are you today?
Pretty good, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed the drive in, it was very nice.
Fabulous. And, you know, it's Monday morning, so did you get up to anything interesting over the weekend?
The weekend was a lot of fun. We had some of our older children over. Our eldest is now 40, bless him. Our youngest is 32, and we had some of the grandkids. We've got 5 grandkids.
Oh,
they range between 7 and 1. So yeah, we were rocking. It was quite busy. The house was destroyed. I was quite glad when I went home.
But I bet you loved every minute of it.
Oh, absolutely. And we were all celebrating around our brand new 2 trees. We just bought 2 trees for our little garden. My wife and I like to spend quite a bit of time in that garden. We're trying to make something of it. But yeah, I never bought trees before. Huge they are. They're like 12 foot tall already. So they're kind of proper things. It was quite fascinating. Yeah. But no, it was a great weekend. Thank you.
Lovely. So you see, by asking questions and interacting with your candidate, you can learn. I've learned, you know, Bobby's married. He has children ranging, you know, in age up to 40. He's got grandchildren. He loves his garden. You know, I've found out an awful lot about him just by trying to relax him and get him talking. At the end of the interview, it's always great to throw in a killer question. How about this one? If we offer you the role, we'd obviously want to take up references. These will probably tell us the dates of your employment, which we already know. How do you feel about facilitating an off-the-record conversation with two of your previous bosses so that we can ask them how to get the best out of you? Why would I do this? Well, it tells me a great deal about the relationship that the candidate has had with their previous bosses. And if they're reluctant, then there may be something going on there that they don't want to share. If they jump at the chance, they clearly have a great relationship with their previous bosses. And the advantage to you is that you either dodge a potential bullet or you genuinely get the chance to learn how to get the best from this person. Now that we've reached the end of the process, you need to make a decision on who gets the job. Utilise the consistent questions you designed. Compare profiles. Was the feedback from the team complimentary or not? How did they score in the tests that you were asked to complete? And were they keen for you to speak to their old boss? All of the tools you've used come into their own now to aid that decision-making process. But please, please, please write to the other candidates and explain that they haven't been successful at this time. I do this on email and follow up with a letter. Also ask them if it's okay to keep their details on file for 3 to 6 months in case you have another role that comes vacant. They can respond to the email, hopefully in the positive, and so you'll then be covered under GDPR. Just for those of you that may or may not know, under GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations, you explicitly need permission to keep a person's data on file for a period of time. So this is a great way of getting their consent. Keep on their good side. Something may yet go wrong with your appointment process, and it's great to be able to go back to somebody and have a very positive discussion. So now that you've selected your successful candidate, there's still work to do. First thing to do is to make them a conditional offer of employment. But what are the conditions? That's up to you. But some of the crucial ones would be, do they have the right to work in the UK? Can they prove that they have the necessary qualifications? And are their references satisfactory? You might also need them to have a full UK driving licence or an HGV licence or even a forklift truck licence. And these are all things that you can specify in the conditional offer letter. Under the Employment Rights Act, you must issue a written contract to the new employee before or on the day they start with you. And there are a number of specific items that need to be covered off in that written statement of employment. So please make sure that you get this right. It's also a great idea to have a staff handbook, as this sets the standards of behaviour for employer and employee. Personally, I prefer to send these out beforehand, so if they have any questions, they can all be answered prior to day one, and then that means when they come in on their first day, it's a very, very positive experience. When I send out the contract, I'd also send out any other forms that I might need them to complete. So your new starter forms, bank details, next of kin, all of those sorts of things, and get some of that paperwork done ahead of time. A good induction should be interactive, and it involves disseminating information in a variety of formats, not just via PowerPoint, so be creative. You should devise your induction so it can be flexible depending on the individual and their needs, as well as tailored to their job role. Induction processes differ vastly between businesses, so while something might work well for a large corporate company, it may not work for a small creative business. The induction process should be well structured and organised, but as we said, allow flexibility if something has to change at the last minute. And rather than planning it just for the first day, think about planning it for the first week or month. Questions to ask when planning your induction. I think this is always a good one. And I would always want to know, is it possible to send the induction plan to the new employee ahead of time so that they know what to expect in their first week? And what do you need to know so that they feel comfortable and confident? What impression do you want to give them? What policies and procedures do they need to know straight away? And how best can you arrange for new employees to meet their co-workers? First of all, you have to have the administrative must-haves. And this is your first aid, health and safety, fire procedures, pay, critical company policies like absence reporting, time off requests, grievance and disciplinary. And all these, any other forms that you need to be completed. This is probably the driest aspect of the induction, and it's very easy to overload the employee with information at this point. As much as possible, make the information available as a resource for the employee to access whenever they want it and read at their own speed. You can help as well by explaining forms clearly and giving the employee a deadline to return them by. It's really important that an induction reflects the company culture and gives the employee a good picture of the overall company goals. It helps to improve staff engagement and sets out early expectations in regard to performance, shared values and the company culture. It's also useful to give a very brief overview of company history and other changes that have occurred recently, especially if they relate to the team that they are working in. The office tour is one of my favourite parts of the induction process, as it includes some of the most vital elements, like where are the toilets and the coffee machine. There's nothing worse on your first day at a job than needing the toilet but not knowing where it is and being too scared to ask. The basic tour should cover all facilities, so toilets, breakout spaces, kitchens, along with any basic rules of usage. One business that I worked in previously said no strong smelling foods. You know, that might be one to consider. Show them where the stationery cupboard is, meeting rooms and the smoking area if you have one. If your office is large, a floor plan, preferably with names of who sits where, is really, really useful and can be stored on a shared drive or an intranet if you have one. The basic tour is probably where you will introduce people to some of the other employees. Unless your company's small, I'd try to avoid introducing them to everybody by name, as it's unlikely that they'll remember them all, and it will be very overwhelming. Instead, focus on explaining roughly who does what in each section and maybe just introduce them to a lead person. If it's available, a company structure chart could be really helpful for new starters so that they can see who the key players are. And also think about including photographs so that they can actually identify the people. First lunchtime is key to any new starter. And unless you've got a big lunch planned, explain what people tend to do for their lunch breaks. Where do they go? Where's the shop or the canteen? For me, another key element to a good induction is time spent with individuals from different departments. Whilst an employee will naturally get to know their line manager and team members within the first few weeks, it's also important for them to understand what the other departments do and how they'll be working with them. Arrange one-to-one meetings with the contact person from another department. This will help them get to know people faster and give them a direct source to go to ask for information. Some people will be really good at getting up off their chairs to go and meet the new people. Others will not be so good about it. So designing this into your induction process will help the new starter to mix. Buddy systems can be particularly good in large companies because the buddy can take them out for lunch on the first day and be great support for those first vital few months. Another tool that can be used is something called the job transition tool, and it's a great aid to seeing how a new recruit is getting to grips with the role. Use a grid like this one, but obviously with the proper task names having been inserted. The important thing here is the no's and excels at columns. The no column is signed off by the new hire when they've been shown how to complete the task. If something's not been signed off, then they need to be shown how to do it. The excels at column is signed off by the person showing them how to do the task when they're actually able to complete the task unsupervised. This is a great way of keeping track of progress through the key tasks. It's very reassuring to be given a plan of your first week in a new role, even if it needs to be flexible. It not only helps you as the new employee, but actively booking in time for various elements of the induction will help other staff to keep to schedule and not forget to do their part. Setting out roughly what they're going to be working on in the first week with their line manager will help set expectations, but will also allow the employee to ask any questions that may help them to prepare for the work they're going to be doing. During this time, run-throughs of the plan should let the employee know about any meetings that they will need to attend during the first week or the first couple of weeks, but also about any major company events that they either will or won't be involved with. If you've got half the company going off for a team building day at the end of the first week, even if the new employee is not involved, it's good to let them know about it. So first of all, they don't wonder where everybody's gone, but equally, they don't think that they've missed something really important. It's often nice to schedule a team or company lunch at the end of the first week for a new starter. This has the added benefit of allowing the new employee to get to know their team better, and is also something current employees can look forward to. And don't forget to introduce new team members at company and team meetings. It's important to put just as much time into preparing the current staff, especially those who will be involved in the induction, for the arrival of the new recruit. If they're well prepared, they'll not only provide a better induction, but also having a team ready to welcome someone new is preferable to a team that is surprised when the new person turns up on day one. Encouraging staff, especially those in different teams, to come and say hello throughout the day will help to make the new starter feel more welcome. So that brings me to the end of my webinar on recruitment, and I'm going to open it up to questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, if you could please use the Q&A for the questions, it will be easier for me to monitor and control rather than chat. And of course, everyone who stays on and beyond the Q&A and completes the survey is entitled to a special offer from Helen. Helen,
yeah.
what is that special offer?
What I'm actually offering, Bob, is to go into a business free of charge and review their recruitment process for them.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's significant. So well worth throwing in a few questions and enjoying this last 15 minutes and then completing the survey. Thank you, Helen. That is a massive offer. So one question's come in on the chat already. With lots of people being furloughed at the moment, does that change anything I have to do if I want to recruit them?
The short answer to that is no. They are still employed by somebody else. You obviously would still have to think about flexibility in terms of when you're asking them in for recruitment, because whilst they're furloughed, they may still be going into work part-time as well. So don't just assume that they can attend an interview or a testing session when it's convenient to you. Still have that open communication with them and treat them as if they are still employed, because they are.
Okay, makes sense. Interesting, a killer question, Helen. What other best questions have you got up your sleeve for us?
Oh, well, I do really like that one about getting in touch with their previous bosses. I think that can tell you an awful lot about people. I also think just getting them talking actually is really, really good, because you will find out an awful lot about people just by getting them talking. If you view the actual interview as an opportunity to just learn more about them as a person, that really will pay dividends for you in the long run.
Cool. Okay, thank you. We have another question in. So with so many candidates available and such a strong talent pool at the moment, are there limits you would put in place for the length of your shortlist?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of that question, Bob?
Would you put any limits in place for the length of your shortlist?
No, I think you've got to go for the best person for the job. Obviously, you might want to think about doing your first sieve on one criteria only, rather than maybe two or three. because that will drop it down. And you might end up in a situation, if you think back to the grid that I showed earlier in my presentation, about only taking the people that score 10 out of 10 and interviewing those, as opposed to at other times, if you're not getting such a good response, you might take 8, 9s and 10s.
Okay, thank you very much. So do it by prioritization rather than limits.
And use that in conjunction with the profiling as well. And, you know, because that will help show some of those softer skills and some of those other personality traits that may fit better than others.
Okay. Another question. In turning down a candidate, do you have to give reasons?
No, you don't. I think personally it's always useful if you can give reasons. And what I prefer to do is to do that through a telephone call rather than putting anything in writing. And have some genuine feedback that you can give them, you know, and something that is constructive. A stock sort of response in terms of feedback can be things like, on the day we had somebody with more up-to-date or more relevant experience than yourself. But that doesn't really help the candidate to improve for next time. So really look at what positives could you draw from the profiling tools, for example, that you might have used, and maybe make some suggestions based on that in terms of the roles that they might want to look at in the future.
Okay, cool. Thank you. How many candidates would you look for initially for the shortlist?
I would probably say aim for somewhere between 6 and 8 and interview 3 or 4.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Helen. We want to build diverse teams. Are there any good recruitment tools to help us build a diverse candidate list?
I think this is where we go to the size of the talent pool you're fishing in here. And using tools like Web Recruit will help, because that posts to all of the job boards. But again, you can only make your selection from those that apply. And that's the bottom line, really. You know, you as a business, you may want to be as diverse as possible, and that is absolutely great. But if people are not applying for the jobs, then I would say you need to go back to basics a little bit more and maybe look at how you are describing the roles within your business. What does your website look like? Is that attractive to a diverse pool of people? You know, are they going to want to come and work for you? What are you doing that's different and inclusive? And so I think there's probably a bigger piece of work around company culture that might need to be done if you're not attracting the sorts of people that you want from that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw a recent advert for a bouncy person, and I thought, you know, that is quite a clever way of making sure you probably don't get any male applicants.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is interesting to think about the words we use in a job ad.
It is very much so.
You know, if we're not careful, we don't indicate that we're after diversity. We buy without thinking about it, probably narrow it down a bit. As a follow-up question that from myself, Helen, you know, are there phrases in a job ad? You know, can you actually say we welcome adverts from a particular community? Can you do positive discrimination?
I wouldn't go so far as to say positive discrimination, because it's still discrimination. Okay. But I personally have used those sorts of, you know, we particularly welcome applications from this sector or this background, but please make sure it's relevant to the job that you want them to do, because then you've got a justification for it. Yeah, because there is something called a genuine occupational requirement, whereby you can ask for particular characteristics. So if, for example, I was recruiting for, and I'm going to go to an extreme here, for a women's refuge that specialised in supporting women from an Afro-Caribbean background, I could advertise for a counsellor to work in that environment who was a black female from an African Caribbean background, because it's a genuine occupational requirement.
Right.
Okay, it's like Indian waiters in an Indian restaurant. There are certain things that are allowable, otherwise you open it up to the much wider talent pool that is out there.
Okay, glad I asked that follow-up question. Insightful, thank you. John, I'm going to try and read out your question, but there's a typo in number 3, so you might want to type number 3 in just in case I misinterpret it. John says, I do a 3-step process. 1, I find out about them. 2, I get them to ask all about me. And 3, I do a contracting interview. Your thoughts about those 3 steps?
I think that sounds, I'm not quite sure what we mean about a contracting interview, but certainly in terms of trying to find out as much about them as possible, that's great, because that's what we're trying to encourage, is that open discussion. I think giving them an opportunity to learn about you is also great. I have had that backfire on me once. I used to use this question I'll share with you as my opening question in an interview, and it did backfire. And my opening question used to be, tell me how you prepared for today's interview. And the answer I was looking for was along the lines of, I've looked at your website, I've followed you on social media, those sort of things, to show that they've taken an interest in the business and learnt something about us. However, at one interview, I posed that question and the young man responded with, well, I set my alarm early. I got up, I had a shower, I made sure I was in plenty of time for the bus. And it just made me realise how easy it was for somebody to misinterpret a question. So I think you've got the right idea there, John. But be very careful how you phrase that.
Yeah, and please do supplement your interview with something else. The research
something
from,
that you can hang your hat on,
yeah.
Something that's very objective.
Okay, I have a question. A point made by Andy, which is a very valid point, is most Indian restaurants are run by people from Bangladesh. That could well be true. That's certainly true of my local Indian, and I've made the mistake of asking them about the Indian cricket team before now, which really didn't go down very well.
No.
Hassan asks, what do you think is or should be changing in recruitment and HR management, especially with the advance in technology, versus sticking to the traditional and conservative approach of recruitment?
Well, personally, and please don't shout me down on this one, I think COVID-19 has moved business forward 10 years easily. The fact that a lot of businesses have been forced into looking at how people work is a positive for me. I think it has brought forward flexible and remote working a long, long way in a very short time. And I know some of my clients are actually giving up their offices and going permanently to a model whereby their staff are working from home on a permanent basis, and then they're just meeting up. The plan is they're going to be meeting up on a fortnightly basis for a team meeting. At the moment, they're just keeping that to monthly. So I think that has been a huge way forward, and I would like to see that continue.
Thank you. Yeah, I probably need to apologise to Sasha. I think we've kicked off an interesting debate about the restaurants and the cricket. Sorry about that. Following on for that question about the change due to COVID, as people have got used to working from home through lockdown, if candidates request this only, in other words, working from home, would you advise employers to discourage or dissuade this?
I think I wouldn't encourage them to do either. What I would encourage them to do is to look at their business, look at what they need doing, and genuinely look at whether this can be achieved via home working, remote working, or whether it is something that does need to be done in the office environment. You know, it's very difficult. I know this is an extreme example, but it's very difficult for a practice nurse, for example, to be taking people's blood if she's based at home. People are turning up at the surgery, she's not there. So there are some jobs that it is going to be impossible to do remotely. But I think you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis for each business and look at the business case.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, I have a client at the moment that's done a consultation with staff on, you know, they would have refused to allow them to work from home before, but they've now done the consultation, which is to say, you know, have you enjoyed it? How much time have you spent? Blah, blah, blah. And one of the questions was, you know, what value do you see in coming into the office? And that quite shocked me. What's your thoughts? Are we going to see companies that don't come back into their offices?
I think so. And as I say, I have got a couple of my clients that are already working like that. And one example I shared, I think with you last week, Bob, was a business that I work with that had made that decision. Their offices, the lease on their offices had just come up. So they made the decision they weren't going to renew the lease. They were all going to remote work, which actually unfortunately meant they contacted me to make their cleaner redundant. But we looked at it, and actually we turned their cleaner into an employee benefit by actually keeping her on. But we now send her to each of the employees' houses for half a day a month, and she does the cleaning for them. And their staff are absolutely over the moon. The cleaner is delighted because she's kept her job, and the business is, you know, functioning remotely and loving it.
It's fascinating what's happened over
I think we'll see a change in model a little bit, and a change in maybe some of the things that we would expect as normal, that will change.
To follow on from that point, John's asked, I've had a person asking for more money to cover travel to the office as the others are now working from home. Your thoughts? I mean, that's stunning.
Sorry, Bob?
That's stunning, I think.
Yeah. It's a difficult one, and I would have to question, why is this person not working from home if everybody else is? And if it is the case that they can't do their job remotely, then maybe it's not an unreasonable request. But equally, you need to be very careful and think ahead to where that may lead you. I'm usually quite reluctant to pay travel expenses because it's generally a question I would touch upon within the interview to say, you know, you live an hour away, an hour and a half away, whatever, you know, have you thought about the impact that that amount of travel time at either end of the day will have on you? So it would normally be something that I think most people would have considered. And I know for me, I wouldn't take a role that was, you know, 2 hours drive from where I lived.
Okay, I'm going to put 2 points together because John's made a follow-up point and Sasha's made an interesting point, which I can turn into a question.
Okay.
John said the home situation is noisy and the broadband is scratchy. But if I put that together with what Sasha said, yeah, what about giving some employees something for their broadband? I mean, would John have an alternative to paying travel? If he were, I mean, should we all be paying for our staff's broadband if they're working from home?
Well, I think if they're working from home, it's not an unreasonable request to kind of, you know, and I'm just plucking figures out of the air here to say if they're working 8 hours a day, maybe you pay around about a third towards their broadband costs. You know, but think about it, you know, it's much cheaper than office expenses, you know, having to have an office that you're paying heating and lighting and rents and rates and everything else on. So, you know, don't be stingy for the sake of it. Think about all the savings you're going to make. And maybe even think about perhaps paying the difference from what they're currently paying for their broadband to upgrade them to a more reliable broadband, and the business pays that difference.
Interesting. Okay. Do you feel with less travel, folks are being more productive? Interesting.
Oh, that's a difficult one because that's a very individual thing, I think. I think the potential is there for people to be more productive because they're going to be less tired.
Mm-hmm.
But it is really difficult. I think that's quite a difficult question. I don't want to pin that one down too easily. I don't think it's a very individual thing. I
Yeah.
think employers have seen increases in productivity because people are remote working, but I don't think it's the removal of the travel element on its own that is accountable for that. I think there's elements of things around distraction, phones not ringing, that there's lots of other things that I think you would have to throw into that mix that has helped the productivity.
Yeah, it's certainly something well worth exploring. Certainly, the company that's done that survey is asking about productivity, and I think they've seen people working longer hours, but that we would debate whether those longer hours are making people more productive. Sadly, even though we still have a few questions pending, we are now at 1 minute past 12, so we're actually over time. Helen, are you able to introduce us to who's speaking next week, or shall I?
You can do that, please, Bob, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, surprise, surprise, it's me. Yay. And we're doing negotiation skills next week. So really looking forward to speaking again. It's been fascinating. Watch yourself and other professionals do this. So come back next week, 11 o'clock, for thoughts on Thursday, and we'll talk about negotiation skills. Please complete the survey, and there'll be some free extras for you. And that biggie that Helen's offering, an assessment of your recruitment process. Thank you very much for that, Helen. Goodbye, everybody. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Go out there and smash it. Enjoy yourselves. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.